Apologies, everyone.
Thanks for joining. Well, again, just want to welcome all of our members and guests to the meeting, and certainly in our first meeting after the month of military child, it's just been an exciting time for military children. We will start first with the approval of the minutes. You have the draft minutes from our February 13th, 2019 meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
Motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
I will abstain since I wasn't here.
Abstain as well.
3 abstentions. Motion passes. Thank you. All right, so we have our first presentation from Carol Bevel on the eligibility for military service. So next, I'd like to request that Ms. Bevel please step to the podium. Mrs. Carol Bevel is the educational specialist for Naval District Richmond. In this capacity, Ms. Bevel works to inform future graduates on the opportunities that service in the United States Navy can offer them. During the February Council meeting, Dr. Baylor wished for the Council to hear about what might prevent a student from being eligible for enlistment or commission in our armed forces. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Good morning, council members, ladies and gentlemen. I am Carol Bevel, Navy Recruiting District Richmond Education Services Specialist, and the artist formerly known as Naval Base Point Loma School Liaison Officer. I am new to this position, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. And so thank you, Dan, for reaching out and inviting us here today. I think to start, it would be beneficial to actually have Master Chief Whalen come and speak to the overarching eligibility requirements to go into the service and the United States Navy. And then I will speak to a little bit more specifics about special education and those students that might be entering that have a current IEP or graduated under an IEP. So I'll turn it over to Master Chief Whalen.
Thanks, Ms. Bevel. Good morning. I don't know if there's, for these slides, my clicker. Does that work? Yes. Okay, a little delayed reaction there. All right, good morning again. Master Chief Whalen. I'm the Assistant Chief Recruiter for the Navy Recruiting District Richmond. I oversee the day-to-day recruiting operations for officer recruiting there at the district. I've been here for a couple years. So I'm just going to cover some basic eligibility requirements as far as getting in. So I know some of you may or may not be familiar with these. Looks like I need to go back a slide here. There we go. So generally speaking, the men and women that we're looking for are 18 to 34 years old, 17-year-old high school seniors, of course with parental permission. It's our primary individuals that we look to recruit into the Navy. With the age limit of being 39 for active component, which was recently upped in age, and then also individuals we're looking for both the active and reserve component as well. They must be U.S. citizens or permanent residents or U.S. non-citizen nationals to join. Be in possession of a Social Security card. They must be of a high school diploma graduate status, Tier 1 or Tier 2 educational criteria as outlined in our educational instructions for the Navy. Be proficient in reading, speaking, writing, understanding the English language, which is evaluated through, most of you are familiar with the ASVAB test that we give. As far as dependent requirements, must have no more than one dependent. Waivers are given on a case-by-case basis for more dependents. It must score at least a 31 on the ASVAB test. And then applicants with AFQT of less than 50 must be classified as a high school diploma graduate or Tier 1 education status. Of course, there's a physical examination that they have to go through as well. And then as far as morally not be under any civil restraint, a substance abuser, or have a pattern of minor convictions or any of misconduct or major misconduct convictions, to include felonies right now, a very limited basis as far as the whole person's really taken into account when looking at these type of things. Just a quick overview of the major opportunities that we have, that we offer our high school students and young men and women coming in the Navy. First, the active duty obligation is one thing that we speak to them about. That's the 3 to 6 year active duty obligation that offers the post 9/11 GI Bill, 100% tuition assistance, the full medical dental, the full Navy experienced active duty. NROTC is another excellent opportunity that we provide these young men and women that I wish it was more publicly known as far as the scholarships go that we have for this program. It's a really great opportunity for young men and women. As it says on here, 160 colleges nationwide provide the NROTC program, or sponsor the NROTC program. For those that have a desire to serve but are looking to maybe go into full-time college students right out of high school, we offer what's called New Accession Training Program, or the Navy Reserves, where they can go into basic training. Upon graduation of basic training, they get guaranteed a technical or trade school. They come home, they do their 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks out of the year drill periods, are subject to mobilization potentially, but they do have benefits that they get out of that as well. So the reserve program. And those are the major opportunities, the overarching opportunities that we talk to these young men and women about. I believe that's my last slide there. Any questions? Okay. I believe Ms. Bevel is going to talk about the IEP.
Okay, so just to touch on just a little bit about how local education agencies and NRD Richmond can collaborate. And I think it was important to give, again, an overarching view of the requirements to serve in general, and I think that will become more clear even after I speak on some of these opportunities. So again, with all the opportunities, some of the post-secondary prep presentations can be offered. NRD Richmond can be scheduled then to come and talk to high school students and all students about some of those opportunities. A lot of times, of course, we think, colleges and only colleges, but these are opportunities for these students to serve. It's just a fact that the large percentage of people will not receive a college education. So with that said, there are absolutely opportunities to explore careers within the service that we can then come and speak to students about. Classroom presentations and career talks, again, what does that look like? Right now, we definitely are looking for those to go into the nuclear field. What are those requirements? What does that mean? What does that look like after their training? Some of the Navy schools are the only way and pathways to actually learn some of those fields. Even civilian corporations will send employees through Navy schools in order to pick up that skill set. The ASVAB and career exploration programs, again, I think it's something that that is a missing link between high school counselors and the Navy in general to explore what opportunities are through that, and we have an extensive program that they can bring in and talk to students about and what those pathways. Education orientation visits. That is something that actually, as the education specialist, I will be working with, and it's really even something that the school liaison officers work with as well in trying to make sure that high schools and school sites in general, it's that military culture piece. And what does it look like, and what do we have to offer, again, in those careers and a day in a life of a military member. So I will be working with educators throughout my AOR, which is extensive in several states, to bring those educators to a visit. It can be everything from experiencing boot camp at Great Lakes to, shipboard visits, so on and so forth, so that they can appreciate all that we do have to offer and what it is like to serve. High school awards programs, again, building those relationships and connections with the high schools, and presenting outstanding scholars and athletes, and inspiration and leadership coming to make that connection with the students. And then the delayed entry program, understanding that they are not committed until after they graduate, but yet can start exploring that prior to graduation. So the education requirements for student graduating under an IEP. At the end of the day, a recruiter is not going to necessarily ask whether the student graduated with an IEP. Specifically, students graduating with a high school certificate of attendance, completion, or special education are those students that receive an attendance-based high school certificate based on an IEP. Now, that does not preclude them, though, from serving. It is a consideration and something that will be looked at. But at the end of the day, as long as students graduating under this and provide that documentation, then they will then be, their record would be reviewed, and if the conditions are met for two-tier education criteria, then that will be reviewed for enlistment purposes. So to really answer the question, how does it, impact a student being able to serve? Well, it depends. Again, that certificate of completion and attendance base does not necessarily mean that they automatically are disqualified to serve. So medical conditions, though, requiring prescription medication are considered on a case-by-case basis during the physical examination. So when that enters into it, in the special education realm in general, again, that would be something that BUPERS Med would look at and determine on a case-by-case basis whether that would they would be suitable for service or not. So that's really different than the education requirements. And that's something that I would assist with as the education specialist, is to actually verify those graduations. What did they graduate under? What type of diploma are they providing? And do they meet that criteria? So there is criteria for somebody completing based on an IEP. But again, the answer to can they serve? Yes, relative to meeting the criteria. So it doesn't, again, mean that they can't serve. What they would do is again, go to a recruiter. They would sit down and go through an evaluation process of what they completed and how they completed, and go through that education piece, and then see if they meet the conditions. And then the medical side of the house during the physical examination would examine any type of medications or conditions that might typically go along with some students that are in the special education system. So it's really two different pieces and two different evaluation processes, the education and then the medical side of the house. So any questions?
Council members? Spence?
I do have just a couple. So just to make sure I understood, so you all will come across the state for some of the programs?
Yes, sir.
Great. And then could you, a little bit about the difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2 criteria, just so we have a sense of what that looks like?
Absolutely. Master Chief, can you speak on that?
Sure. So we have there is a national database that our recruiting headquarters keeps based on each school evaluated individually. So your classic Richmond Public High School typically is going to be your Tier 1 type education. Now let's say that somebody has a combination. Maybe they started out homeschooling and went to a public high school and then a private high school, and they didn't take the traditional say, of getting their high school diploma. So it's evaluated that they're Tier 2, meaning that it's not the regular traditional high school diploma graduate 4 years that your typical student does. That could be classified as Tier 2. It doesn't prohibit or restrict any career opportunities in the Navy. It's just a different evaluation system as far as maybe they require a 50 ASVAB score instead of a 31. So there are maybe some different requirements there, but doesn't prohibit them as far as career opportunities in the Navy go.
Other council members?
Oh, yes, sir. So thank you very much for the presentation. Question about, so digging deeper into the criteria, though, is that something that's shared with counselors? Is that a shared information in terms of detail, in terms of helping work with the counselors that are working with students, in terms of like making sure we're talking to the right students, not setting correct expectations, that sort of thing? Or is it something that once the students into the system, or the graduates into the system, then the criteria is strictly Navy evaluation? Do you understand what I'm saying? Is there a sharing of information in terms of the criteria with the LEAs? Is that envisioned here?
Yes, I mean, the criteria, it's transparent. I mean, you know, if this is the score on the ASVAB that you need to enter, this is the score on the ASVAB that you need to enter.
Okay.
The ASVAB is, I mean, it's something that can be practiced and, you know, it's easily accessible for, you know, prep courses and things of that nature and how to explore that. So it's not something that the student would not be aware of what those requirements that they need to meet once graduation occurs and what they're graduating under. And absolutely working with the counselors to make them aware of what that criteria is so that they too can manage expectations and, you know which students might be, it may be a viable option for them. So again, I can, you know, meet with the counselors and would be happy to do so that I can share that information and, you know, so that they can then, you know, work with those students. And again, whether they are special education students, you know, or students across the board. Again, that's why, you know, I thought it really would be beneficial just to say, you know, across the board, whether the student is, you know, graduating under an IEP or not, this is your basic criteria. And if they meet that basic criteria, including a you know, a diploma of completion, then we work from there. Okay, if that's your case, then this is what we need to meet in order for you to serve. If it's a, you know, a high school diploma from the Tier 1, then this would be your requirements. And those requirements are not something that can't be shared. Absolutely, we can share those. Because again, we want to manage the expectation of not just the counselors, but the students themselves and set them up for success, whether that's to strive to hit that goal or whether it's something that they can immediately obtain. Does that help?
Yep, it does.
Okay.
Mr. Williams?
It would be safe to assume that ASVAB score in combination with the diploma type, that's going to be the more important consideration than whether a student has an IEP or a 504 plan, which would be considered, I would guess, in much the same light. I mean, that's what's going to take precedence in a decision-making process, correct?
Yes, sir. At the end of the day, it really is a level playing field for all the students. If you can cut the score and meet the requirements, it really is going to be irrelevant whether that was under an IEP or not. And, you know, so that was kind of the beauty of the answer to the question is it does not inhibit their ability to serve if they can meet the criteria.
Right.
Which, again, that, you know, diploma and then the ASVAB score.
And I know you're representing Navy. Would it be safe to think that all branches are on have a similar philosophy concerning this, or is that not safe?
So if I may.
Absolutely.
So in regards to the IEP and the 504, it really, the impact is more on the medical aspect of coming in, right? So when we evaluate, when education specialist evaluates transcripts, it really doesn't come into play too often. It's, if we have a young man or women, I'll give an example. Today, ADD, ADHD is a very common thing. We get a lot of young men and women that at one point or are still currently on medication for that. That's always a, hey, did you have an IEP? do you have an IEP? Did you have any type of special education? So that's really where the IEP comes into effect. And then in regards to other services, it's when they go to MEPS to do their physical, it's the same overall general entrance standards to get into the military or to pass that physical. So in that sense, it would be the same for other branches where if a young man or woman had something like ADD and they required to show proof of that IEP, that determination is then made at the local level, at the MEPS doctor, saying, okay, I think this is suitable, or typically what happens is they pass that off to the specific branch's overall medical authority. So for the Navy, BUMED, and then our specialists would determine, medical specialists would determine if they think that specific IEP would impact an individual's ability to successfully complete Navy training or the pipeline of Navy training. So at that level, it would be different for all branches of the service, but at the general level, through MEPS to clear the physical, it is an even playing field in regards to the having an IEP. So I hope that helps a little bit.
And that's why I touched upon the medical side, because, any type of prescription medication, whether it is for ADHD or ADD, is again, that's a medical determination, and that would go through a review process as well. We know that sometimes that's very common to be in conjunction with a 504 plan. And again, that would be, though, not through the education requirements, but a medical determination. And again, I can't really speak to the medical side of the house, and that is a review process. There are some rules and regulations on that as well. But again, it's different than the true education requirements for it, which would be, again, the diploma and the ASVAB score. Then they would have to look at, and go through the process of, it can be everything. When was the last time you were on the medication? What type of medication? And so on and so forth. And then that determination would be made.
Dr. Baylor actually emailed me two questions. One I think you've basically answered, but I'll ask the second. But she did mention that, at least in her role working with counselors, that she gets many, many questions, even as recently as last week, around whether a student with a diagnosis of ADHD and taking medicine is eligible. And so I think we probably can work together on putting some information out to explain that it's case by case and how the medical evaluation works. The second question is similar in that she works with many families who fear that receiving a label of having an emotional disability may prevent them from accessing the military because of inherent concerns in the standards about potential behavior issues. And that's not always how that works in the educational setting. And so we talked a little bit about ADHD, but what about students with emotional disabilities?
And again, I'm not a medical professional. I think I understand the question. As an example, students that fear talking to the military family life counselors at the school sites or the school site counselors, fearing that label of then, it's a mental disability or having some type of label. I've had students say, well, I don't want to go talk to the counselor because then I can't go in the service. Whether that is a true statement or not, I can't answer that at this time, but I'm more than happy to try and, get a little bit more detailed information on what that looks like for a student that receives social emotional support and how that may affect their ability to serve. And again, I would, say that would go through a process, and there's levels, right? There's levels of social emotional support, and again, medical in the house, is there a diagnosis and so on and so forth. That's not something that I'm capable of answering, but I can try and get a little bit more detail and connect you to the appropriate resource to answer that a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, thank you. I think that would be helpful because if a student refuses education services for fear that it could prevent a military career, then they're really missing out on an opportunity during their K-12 education to be as successful as they could be.
And we want to make sure that it's accurate information. If they are misunderstanding something or are not receiving, there's never, whether it would inhibit them from, being able to serve or not, we would never want a child to not receive, mental health services or social emotional support at the end of the day. So again, being able to give you a little bit more accurate information, on that and what that looks like, I'd be happy to do, and I'll follow up with that.
If time permits, I could add a little bit to that too, to be more specifically.
Yeah, we have time, sir. Thank you.
So, and this is something that is a topic that's very meaningful for me. That's why I felt it necessary to contribute. So recently, there's been the mindset that we have many soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen that have been diagnosed with certain mental health issues, and it's becoming less and less taboo, for a lack of a better term. It's more common. People are seeking more treatment in the military and in general population in general. So there is a stigma that, if you go see a counselor and you're diagnosed with anxiety, depression, or have any type of mental health issues, you can never get into the military. It used to be fairly accurate statement. I've been recruiting for 15 years, and if I had a young man or woman that would come say, hey, I was diagnosed with depression or anxiety, or I had panic attacks, in my mind, there would be a 0% chance of them ever getting in the military. We've recently, in recruiting, had, I don't know of an official change on that, but I've seen recently where more of the whole person concept's been taken into account. So a previous diagnosis of depression, or if you've seen a counselor for any type of issues, I've personally witnessed it, more people getting approved for less serious mental health issues than ever in the past. I don't know if it's because of more of a better understanding these days than in the past. We encourage our shipmates, our sailors, our soldiers to go seek help, and they can stay in the military. So why can't we, address young men and women that have sought counselors to come in as well? So the mindset, I'm seeing it shift right before my very eyes. And in fact, a big thing right now, self-mutilization among young men and women. That's another huge issue that we're seeing right now, where up until recently, 100% were getting disapproved through our overall medical authority, not being able to get into the Navy. Where the issue comes in is that oftentimes somebody that, it's hard for an individual to come forward and say, I have these issues, because then what we're going to ask, we need all documentation as far as their issues. And a lot of people are reluctant to want to do that. And that's where sometimes our medical experts, they uncover other things that may have been potential issues. So, but to answer your question, it's because somebody's seeking counseling, or have seen a counselor, or have any type of special needs, it doesn't necessarily rule them out for military experience. We're really focusing on the whole person concept of an individual and what the potential they have to provide the military. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Well, Master Chief Whalen, Ms. Bevel, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise with us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Mr. Dunham from our team here at the Department of Education to share our military student families update.
Thank you, Dr. Lane. I also wanted to thank Carol, just really modest, that she just got on board. She just came, you were hired and you started work last Monday?
This is day 7.
Day 7. And I talked to her commander, Underhill, a few weeks back, and I said, hey, can you get somebody from your command to come out and maybe answer this question for Dr. Baylor? And he was quick to say yes to that. He really look forward to the opportunity. And he said, I'm sure our educational specialist, when that person comes on board, will do a good job. And I have to say you did. Thank you so much. It was an excellent presentation. She's a former school liaison officer, folks. Her husband just retired after serving in the Navy, correct?
Yes.
okay, and she came directly from Point Loma Naval Station in San Diego. So she doesn't even have a house yet. She's living in temporary housing, so.
I'm in a hotel right downtown,
right.
but enjoying it. Love Richmond. I am
good.
really digging Richmond.
And Master Chief, I did not know you all were coming, and I'm presently, I'm very happy that the two of you all did. So I appreciate your contribution to today's presentation. I think it really did help answer some questions. So today, what I'd like to do is just kind of move forward and give you sort of an update of my ongoings and what we've been up to. So the first thing I'd like to talk to you about are compact interactions that I've had since February. These are things directly related to the compact. Those sections there you see are parts of the compact code, and these are cases that I've worked through. So the first one, in terms of absence related to deployment, I got a very anxious call one Monday morning about 5 a.m. And it was from a master sergeant in the Air Force. And it was a single mother, and she was calling from Afghanistan. And she said that her daughter had suicidal ideations and was out in the western part of the state. And that she was requesting that she leave her deployment to come and help her daughter out because her daughter hadn't been handling the mother's deployment very well. So that was very alarming to me because the mother shouldn't had to have called me from Afghanistan and to be at that point where she was frustrated and beside herself where she couldn't focus on her mission, and that the school system hadn't notified me that this child might need some support. So, but lo and behold, she called me because she wanted to see if she could end that child's school year early because she was coming back from deployment, and then she was going to return to her home base, which was in Texas. This child was placed in the care of her, first of all, her sister and brother, and that didn't work out, and then moved to the care of the grandparents, and so that probably led to the transitional challenges the student was experiencing there. So we worked with the school system, and I think we were able to work through that and close that school year out early, and then get this child to leave with her mother once her mother arrives. And I think she's either on her way here, or she's already here getting the child. So immediately upon finding out about this particular case, I contacted school liaison officers across the state and connected them, or at least let them know about this circumstance, and then offered up to that parent and to that school system that points of contact, folks that they could contact should they want to seek counseling for the child that might not exist in that rural location in the state. We've had 3 cases of transfers during the senior year, and most of those cases I was giving technical assistance to the local school divisions on those, not necessarily to the parents. And I'm happy to say in every single one of those cases it worked out great. And so of the time, Dr. Spence, I've pointed him to your school division because you do an excellent job of making sure that students who are moving during the senior year are well supported. So I put them in contact with, if they had any particular questions on how they might work through that with Amanda Yoder, and that was very helpful. One of the most challenging cases, though, comes from a student who was transferring to Maine, and we had to work with Maine's commissioner on getting the school system in Maine to understand the compact law. And that school division in Maine didn't even want to enroll the child because they thought the transcripts that we had from Norfolk Public Schools indicated that child has successfully completed all the credits. But the child hadn't successfully completed our graduation requirements, which requires that they also complete and pass an English writing assessment for verified credit, and then their math assessment for verified credit. And this student hadn't been successful in completing those. So she hadn't been able to master her, demonstrate that she had mastery of the content. So she wasn't going to be awarded a Virginia diploma And so in this particular case, it worked out better for her to receive the Maine diploma because Maine didn't have that end of course requirement that Virginia had. And since the child wasn't in Virginia, we couldn't assist her with expedited retakes and other things that offer extra support in passing this test. The commissioner in Maine determined that it was in the child's best interest to receive a Maine diploma. That was a very unusual case. And there's some lessons learned from that. I think I'm going to circle back with the school division there in Norfolk and talk with Dr. Birdsong about the case because I think there were some missteps on the front end of receiving the child from the Dominican Republic into the school division and us analyzing the transcripts so that the child could have received these tests for verified credit closer to the time in which she received the content or the instruction. So I think that something we learned from that particular case. Special education services, I had one particular case for navigation for special education services. There was a parent who called me who was in Alexandria, Virginia, and they had moved there, and they had one special needs child who got into a school that, they have, by the way, they have 4 elementary age students. 2 of them were enrolled in this one school where the student was receiving special education services, and the parent wanted all the students to go to that particular school, but it wasn't the zone school, but it was easier on the parents. It was a hardship case, and I'm happy to say that the school division is working with that particular family and making sure that that family is taken care of in terms of making sure that all the children are attending one particular school. Had one case, and this was another unusual one, on eligibility definition. They wanted to know if a military spouse is covered under the compact. She's still a high school student. She had moved to North Carolina, and she was a senior, and she was a student who received special education services. And North Carolina was contacting the school division in Nelson County, telling the school division in Nelson County that this student falls under the compact, because she's connected to the military. The answer was no, she's really not covered under the compact. Compact is for military dependents. It does not say military spouses. However, we should treat students like we would treat any student in transition and support them where we can. But sure. Well, I think that I should have clarified. I'm sorry, sir. Should be children of military service members, not dependents necessarily. I'm sorry. Yep. Okay. So anyway, I think that North Carolina realized that they should, do what they need to do to support the child through special education services. So we clarified that. These are some other notable things that I've been dealing with that came through my office. We've been fielding a lot of calls on remote enrollment legislation questions, so I'm going to get into that here in my presentation in just a minute. So they're asking for technical assistance on that. So I've been working with Fairfax County Public Schools because I think they have a really good system in place for handling remote enrollment. So as people give me a call, I've been putting them in contact with David Anderson, and I've been also answering some of the questions where I can. Course placement support. We've had a challenge with mid-year transitions in terms of course placement support. And what that means is a child comes into a school division and the school division doesn't have the course available at that particular school for that child. In some cases where the school division has online education, they've been able to enroll into those programs. In some cases, they don't have those online programs, and so we've been able to enroll them in virtual Virginia programs. And in one particular case, we even reached back to the Department of Defense educational activity and asked about their possibility of being dual enrolled as a DODEA student and enrolled in the school system in the state of Virginia to allow them to continue that course of study so that they could get the full credit. What happens sometimes in mid-year transitions, especially for students who are coming from a 4x4 schedule to a full schedule or from a full schedule to a 4x4, is they're missing out on credits. They lose credits. And so the Department of Defense Educational Activity and folks there are talking about this issue. And we're working on possible solutions. It's kind of, we're just brainstorming right now, but we think that this online educational approach or module-based approach is the best approach. And so we're looking for maybe more conversation on that. And I think Amanda will be very happy about that, because she's, in particular, Amanda Yoder in Virginia Beach has asked me to look into that and investigate possible solutions, so more to come for that. I get a lot of calls for Purple Star designation, of course, offering technical assistance there. And then I've gotten one call from a military service member who's working out of the Pentagon, whose students attend a school up in Arlington. It's a Montessori school. And it was about military discrimination. He feels that he's being discriminated against because he wears a uniform. And in his particular case, I have to say it appears so based on what he has reported to me. And so we don't oversee private schools. The Virginia Department of Education does not oversee private schools, but I will be working with the Association for Private Schools for the state of Virginia to let them know of this particular case and to ask them what kind of recourse he might have to go above the head of the school. This is the head of the school who has an issue with him, because I think he's looking for additional support, and how does he file a formal complaint, and how does he get that taken care of. He's also seeking legal assistance, but that's just a little bit out of the ordinary, and it's something that I, have been managing. Let's see, where's that clicker? Here it is. Oh, did you already click? Thank you. So Purple Up Day was April 10th, I think. Again, it was very successful. We had photographs taken, and people around the state did their best to purple up and celebrate military kids, and I was happy to see that. The state of Virginia it really comes out and really does a good job of making sure that the military students feel welcomed and that they know that they're supported, and the schools use the month of April to do that, and especially Purple Up Day. So they always look forward to when that day is going to be, and how they can best celebrate those students. Probably one of the best showcases of, during the month of military children is the Virginia Beach Military Student Art and Essay Showcase. They usually, because of the Navy works, MWR works with Virginia Beach Public Schools. They make copies of all the artwork, copies of all the essays, and then they take their boards, and the Navy pays for the gas to haul them up here to Richmond, and we put on a display here in the James Monroe Building. And so I want to personally thank Debbie for working really hard on getting that done. It's very meaningful for the state employees to see that. I can tell you that every year that display is up here in Richmond, that I get people that I've never met before calling me and connecting with me and telling me how much they appreciate seeing that. Nothing speaks louder than the visual image created by a military-connected child or an essay written by a military-connected child. It will bring you to tears, some of the things that they show through their art and through their writing. And so anyway, I always look forward to that. I attended a couple of programs, one at Mary Caldecott, that was actually their Purple Star recognition, was also a book reading and giveaway. And so that was nice to be a part of that, and to this Mary Caldecott is one of those Purple Star schools, and so I was able to talk about that a little bit and showcase that. I did the same thing at the Norfolk Month of the Military Child Celebration. That was their highlight program for the month of April. I want to point out that I think Norfolk's really stepping up. I mean, they're doing, they've hired someone full-time, Dr. Birdsong, to oversee, the relationships that schools have with military children, and they're trying to improve the transitions of those students into their school division, and they're working on that. And so I'm happy to say that that continues under Dr. Birdsong's leadership, and that she and I have continued to strengthen our relationship, and she seeks my support often when she has most challenging things, so it's a great relationship. And then lastly, I presented at the Virginia Military Advisory Council meeting, the VMAC, and I thought that went very well. I was able to sit there and talk about the great things that we do across the state of Virginia and through my department and supporting military-connected children about, and I ended on thanking the commanders on their partnerships on a few things that they do for our schools, and some of the STEM showcase that's at at Oceana and some of the other Partners in Education programs that are offered through other commands. And I talked about the relationship we have with school liaison officers and resources they bring to the table, and exceptional family member programs and MFLEX. So that was great. Debbie also did a great presentation. She was there, and I can say that I think that those in the audience were very satisfied with what they heard about what we do to support military families. So on the remote enrollment bill, that's what I call it. So this was Senate Bill 1249 and House Bill 1623. They're like bills. This now calls, I think July the 1st, Dr. Lane, is that correct, will be sent out, and there'll be a change that the schools will be required to allow military families to enroll remotely. Now, we're going to be one of only 17 states that do this, and I actually think that this piece of legislation is very, it's written in such a way where it provides the flexibility that school systems need to work with these families. It's one more thing that's going to help those families as they transition in and out of this state to get things done relatively quickly. So let you read that for a second. But essentially, they're going to have the same kind of access to, special programs and applications to those things as any other student at the same time that they occur in that school division, which is great. So these are some of the trainings that I've done since the last meeting in February. So I was called to Andrews Air Force Base, especially to do a special education transition planning with the parents of autism students there. We have some families connected with Andrews Air Force Base, which is located in Maryland, but they live in Fairfax County. And so I gave them a general overview of the steps associated with transitioning from, secondary school to post-secondary careers or education. So that was great. The next training I just came back from in Florida was the Army SLO training, and there I worked with a panel of folks, Jamie Albers, School Liaison Officer for Fort Belvoir, and I, and Dodea, and the chairman of the National Interstate Compact Commission all sat down and conducted a training where we gave them scenarios of how we work together and how we collaborate on managing compact-related issues and concerns. And I have to say that many of the school liaison officers there came up afterwards and thanked us for that presentation, saying that during their training was probably the most beneficial. And so I think that that's a testament to how we manage the compact in State of Virginia and the relationship that we have with our school liaison officers. Right now, we're almost at the end of the module development in terms of getting the content down. I'm working with Dr. Jennifer Drake at George Mason University, and so we're in the process of getting to the filming stage. So this module will replace the module I have online for Purple Star designation. And remember that Purple Star designation module was developed as a form of outreach to schools so they can be better educated on interstate compact and on the military supports that are in installations around the state. This will be housed on the TTAC site, so all schools can just search for it, all professionals can search for it, and it's going to be, I think fantastic. It's going to be used at George Mason University in their teacher preparation program, so it's going to be a module that the students are going to be required to take and report back on, I guess, in their course. There's some upcoming trainings that I have going on. So at the end of this month, the exceptional family member case managers and the SLOs will attend the critical decision points training that the the Virginia Department of Education's Family Engagement Team puts on. This is helpful because it kind of will educate the school liaison officers and exceptional family member team members on those critical decision points that are involved in special education. These trainings have been going on around the state for almost a year now, and given to parents and given to schools, and I think it would be very important for school liaison officers and EFMs to know about. The Military Officers Association of America has contacted me and asked me to come to their National Guard and Reserve Family Forum and talk about how we work out compact issues and how we support military families and connected students, so I'm looking forward to that. We've got another presentation that we're going to be making at the American School Counselors Association. It's the same, almost the same team that presented at the Army SLO training. This gives us what we've been needing for quite some time. Gives us an opportunity on a national stage to talk about how school divisions need to consider the unique needs of military-connected children during their transition. We can point best practices and reach a huge population of counselors that are assembled in Boston. So it's a great opportunity, and I have to say that's a school counselor at Hayfield, Meredith. What's Meredith's last name again? I forget. Do you remember? It's okay. Maya? She submitted this application for the presentation because she saw the presentation that I did along with other folks at the Military Child Education Coalition training seminar last summer, and it was accepted by the association for the national conference, and so I'm pleased to say that we're going to be up there making a difference. And then I've been working with Secretary Hopkins. Secretary Hopkins calls me in his office, I think it was the week before last, asking if Virginia can consider a signing day. This would be a day where we would set aside and celebrate military students in high school who are entering into military service, either through a commitment to enlistment or through a commitment through and JROTC scholarship, or not, well, just JROTC scholarships. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to the work on getting that done. I think it would be great for the state of Virginia. I think we should be celebrating them. It's a very honorable thing that these students are stepping up and doing, and I think that there should be some time set aside for that. So more to come on those kinds of things in the future. Yeah, any questions?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Dan, for all the work you're doing. This is great news. I do have a few questions. Number one, I do think the signing day is a wonderful opportunity to celebrate the students' unique willingness to serve. So that's a wonderful idea. I vote for that if I ever have a vote. Also, so on the compact interactions that you went through, my question is this the total number of cases that you've seen since our last meeting, or is this just a highlight, ones you wanted to highlight for us in terms of what issues you thought were important for us to hear about?
Those are issues related to the compact.
Mm-hmm. This is the total number of cases since our last meeting?
That are compact-related cases,
that you've,
yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I wondered, in that first case, when you were contacting the school, in contact with the school, was the school aware of your office as a resource? In other words, you first heard directly from the mother, and I'm just wondering if the school was aware of you all as a resource.
I don't think to the extent they needed to be,
Yeah.
no.
Right.
So that led me to believe that we still have a ways to go in terms of outreach.
Right. So that leads me to my next question, which I think all these places where you're presenting, certainly the National Counselors Association Conference is a great opportunity to lead, as you said, a very large group of counselors. Wondering, and I'm sorry if I don't recall your past presentations around where you've been presenting, but thinking about educational associations here statewide, and I don't even know what the statewide counselors association's name is, Brad, but superintendents, sorry, Dr. Lane. I'm rusty. I used to present there every year, and I can't remember the acronym. Virginia Superintendents Association, and like the VEA, those types of things. Just wondering, on a statewide basis, the professional associations, are those in your mind's eye, maybe every year as a regular opportunity to be on the agenda?
I'll tell you, we get several topics on many of those agendas, and that's difficult to do. One of the things that we're focusing on, we throw a statewide conference for the VDOE around equity, and we actually see where equity for military children is an important topic. And so one of the things that we're thinking about, because we typically receive a a team from every school division in the Commonwealth at that, is that maybe we'll drive some of that more proactively through our events. You know, the last presentation on the last day of the conference at 4 o'clock doesn't always get the audience that we're looking for.
Right. He's absolutely right. So I put in a presentation my first year, and I think it was 2017, to present at the Virginia Secondary School Principals Association, and I was accepted. And I went there. I was at 4 o'clock on the last day, and I didn't have a soul. But we also presented at the school mental health conference that we put on through our Department of Student Services. I think it was the year before last. And I think Dee Dee Baylor and the Fort Belvoir team came and did a great presentation there. And you have school counselors, you have school social workers, school psychologists all attending that. So that went over very well. I connect Military One Source with the School Counselors Association for Virginia so that they can always be there to talk about that resource. I haven't had an opportunity to speak at the School Counselors Association, but I do think, Debbie, you guys have been a couple of times.
We're actually going to apply for this year, too. We just
Okay.
had, I think it's due May 15th. So
Right.
We're working towards that.
Right, so perhaps we'll partner and be a part of that. But we try. We get out there and we're doing those kinds of things. We're
Right.
attempting to get involved.
I appreciate that. If there is anything we can do as a council in terms of making a request to one of these professional organizations, in terms of breakout sessions, or, you know, I think as a council, perhaps maybe raising support as a voice for Dan as he makes the pitch, that might be something we might want to consider.
Yeah, and I think what we find in many of these cases, the larger divisions that have many students that are military connected tend to have really great processes for this. You know, there may be a community that the child that's moving in is the first military connected child that they'll have. So the opportunities will be there. They'll have seen the memos. I mean, we put out memos over and over again on this. And the divisions with military connected children will stay really connected to the information that we're providing. But when a new student comes in, sometimes it's just giving time for the compact to be around long enough that each community has experience going through the process.
And that was the case. I think with Brunswick, this was the very first military child they had
Right.
ever had. And unfortunately, that student didn't manage the deployment
Right.
very well.
I will say, Dr. Lane, I respect that. I just have seen in my 4+ years now on the council, we've heard testimony in Virginia Beach across divisions that have high populations. And I think this is an issue that often it's an individual counselor in an individual school, not really a district-wide challenge necessarily. And so some of these decisions are made by counselors and are never even rise to the level of coming to Dan's attention, because in the military, we follow orders, we take decisions, and that's the end of it. So in my view, I guess what I'm making the case for is that to consistently be going to places that we're able to deliver, you know, information about the compact to as many professional organizations and gatherings is just my. I just want to say that it's a constant educational process, both for the family side and for the school side, individual school administrations as well as the district-wide, statewide policy. So that's my only point. And so if there are places where we're not getting traction, I think maybe it would be advised that the council could, this is kind of an action step we can help with, I think.
Well, I'm taking it as a tasker for myself. I think I could be a little bit more proactive and maybe attending those and making myself known to those folks and you know, an opportunity for myself to present to them if they choose to have me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dan? Okay, thank you.
Very good.
This time, we would like to invite comment from the public. The floor is open for any members of the public who wish to address the council. Please come forward and state your name. Dan, do we have anybody signed up in advance?
No, we do not.
Okay. Is there anyone that would like to make public comment? Yes, please come.
How are you today? Christine Stiefel. I'm the school liaison officer at Joint Base Langley-Eustis on the Eustis side of the house. So I am an Air Force employee working primarily with Army families. But I did jet out for a moment speak to the Master Sergeant, and I just kind of wanted to share the same view with you all in regards to that medical component of children preparing for the military and what that might imply for them, as well as how that impacts them as far as the recruitment process and what the recruiters are saying, and not necessarily with the Navy specifically, but my son is an 18-year-old and has been approached and also approached individuals, recruiters from different branches, of which have gotten the notice. He is a child with multiple disabilities. He does have an, received his GED and had an IEP itself throughout the time frame. He also has diagnosis of ADHD and mood disorder, and their concern has always been just go off the medication. He can go without, they'll tell him this, go off your medication. We'll be able to accept you. Your records will not be reviewed, because what the recruiters are looking for is to get somebody in. And unfortunately, what they're not looking at is the best interest of the child and or those that they're serving with. So my concern is wholeheartedly across the board for when we're looking, I think you had said about some of the questions that come forward. Those are the same kinds of questions that I have had multiple times, and concerns that I have in regards to specifically recruitment of children, perfectly fine if they're on their medication and able to sustain. But if you tell a child to come off their medication and, of course, they want to serve their country, they're going to do that. That's very frightening for the child, that's very frightening for the family, and it's certainly frightening for the country. So just kind of annotating how important that is when we look at those recruitment kinds of things and how our recruiters are presenting themselves to the students and making sure that we're giving them most accurate, but also safety for them. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Can I piggyback?
Please come on.
I
Please join
wanted
us.
to ask while they were there, and I know that wasn't a perfect, I was going to kind of wait, but, so I actually have a question for you guys since you're still here. So as it relates to, I know what we were talking about was kind of that very separation between the education and the medical. But I think what we recognize is oftentimes they are not separate, they are incredibly intertwined, and I think that's what we were all kind of looking at over there. So I was going to be the one that didn't speak this time, so I apologize. So I do have a question because I think what we recognize, we talked a little bit, so the ASVAB. So for children who are on a 504, there might be accommodations as it relates to taking. Are there accommodations available for that? No. So then that was going to be my next question. So if we were, I really think that while we have a presentation that has separated the two, I feel like in so many ways, I think educationally we recognize that we can't separate the two, because we recognize that children are receiving accommodations. They've got to go into the class, the training that they need. And so if they have somehow had longer time or something like that, and I get what you're saying, that by the time they get to the MEPS processing, that's where the determination separates the two. So they get them kind of linked into a certain process, then eventually the medical world kind of separates the trajectory for them.
Yes, because a diagnosis is not an educational challenge.
I'm just going to, for order, because I'm the chairman, this is public comment. We can open discussion in a minute. Thank you for bringing the point. And I don't mean to be overly formal there, but just make sure that we're always following that process. And when we get to open discussion, we can have some conversation about that. But we'll finish public comment first, and I apologize for cutting off the back and forth. But if you want to respond via public comment, you may come on up.
I think that the open discussion will.
Okay, thank you. Any other members of the community want to speak in public comment? Okay, thank you. Now, at this time, we'll close public comment, and we can have open discussion on any items from the council. And if council members may allow me, I'll ask Mrs. Bevel to come forward and share some information based on what we heard in public comment.
Well, again, I'd just like to reemphasize that the service in no way, shape, form, or fashion, and I think I can
speak for, all of the branches, would ever discourage a student or anyone from seeking mental health services. As far as separating the two, again, the service makes that distinction between the medical side and the education side. Each will be reviewed separately, although we know that they do commingle, without a doubt. But because it can be a diagnosis, that's medical. We just know that as an educator, that again, that diagnosis may go hand in hand and necessitate an IEP. But for service purposes, they do have to be looked at separately. And again, in that process does not mean that a person can't serve. It's going to be a case-by-case basis, and it's going to be determined by, the level of that condition. And when we were speaking out in the hallway, what I kind of equate it to, or an analogy, if it is a condition that necessitates, a daily type of medication, we have to remember that, we're service members, right? And, when you're serving your country, you are not always have the capability to have access to something that would be a necessary daily medication. So we have to look at those circumstances and what a service member, what the true nature of what they could be doing. So, in other words, say we take and we look at it, a type 1 diabetic, that it necessitates that they have, insulin in order to survive on a daily basis. No more could we, say that you will always have the ability to have access to that medication. Could we do that for somebody that it necessitates for their mental health condition to have some type of medication on a daily basis? They just, you can't guarantee that when you're going downrange or you're in a remote area in Afghanistan. So I can't say as the medical professional and the review board what level is acceptable for service on the medical side of the house. What I can say is that those graduating on the education piece under a degree of completion, that under an IEP and not a more traditional high school diploma, again, does not preclude them from serving. And sometimes, a 504 plan does not necessitate an IEP either. I mean, again, each person, an IEP is an individual education plan. It's an individual. So I think we'd have to really look at each individual fairly and with the criteria to really make that determination. And the recruiters that may be, providing information that is not to the best benefit or welfare of somebody that is looking to serve, I would like to think that is not something that is prevalent. And again, I appreciate you speaking to the Master Chief. He is at NRD at the district, so we can take that that feedback forward. It's always it's good feedback. It's something that we need to be aware of, and so I do appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you. It sounds like, as with all things, it's a communication issue. And so going back to what you talked about earlier, one of the roles of the council is to help with that communication, I think. And so figuring out how we share with our school divisions, our LEAs, our counselors, and our principals, the information that students and families who have students with special needs need in order to assess their child's options relative to military service. And so, frankly, from an LEA perspective, I don't think we've ever had that conversation. I mean, there's not a brochure in the counseling office. And so, how do we help with that, I think, is really the fundamental question that we probably should weigh as a council, whether or not that is providing training to the associations, providing literature, which is very clear. We go back to the questions about Tier 1 and Tier 2, and that's not clear yet for me, but I understand that generally what it's related to. But making it clearer for families so they can assess whether or not that's an option for their child. And that's actually equally important as we think about our transition meetings. And so, transition in the IEP process is an important component as a student begins to approach the end of their educational career. Being able to effectively discuss transition options in the IEP meeting with the team could be hindered by a lack of information here. And so the degree to which we can make sure that even our IEP teams have this information available to them, I think would be important. So I think collaborating with NRD and or any other recruitment organization that wants to be engaged with the council and working with Dan in particular to come up with what that communication literature might look like, I think is a next step that we probably ought to put on the books.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking about Mrs. McAuliffe's comment, and maybe it's developing the materials, council approving the materials, and then once a year, sending a letter to every counselor and maybe even special education coordinator in the state, just so that everyone's getting the same information. And I was thinking after the first month of school, just because so many counselors are hired in the first month, but then there's the transition issue before the first month. But Dan and I will take some time and think and bring that back to the council the next time. Yeah.
And I just would like to add, honestly, in this forum, I didn't, plan to provide, a real in-depth what, depending on the high school, what tier did that fall into and the requirement. But again, I'm more than happy to develop that, something that's easily understood, and provide that to you as a follow-up. I mean, again, that criteria and what a high school falls under is pretty transparent. So I don't have a problem at all. Then, I can follow up, provide that to Dan for the council as well, so that, there's a little bit better understanding of what that means.
Any other open discussion from the council? Thank you. Bevel, sorry. Great. Well, thank you to all the guests and speakers that joined us today, and really appreciate the presentation and the dialogue there at the end. The council now is going to enter into closed session. The military student identifier data is not a public record. On behalf of this council, I'll be requesting the data to be shared with each council member so we're knowledgeable about the scope of military-connected children in our state and the council can perform its duties in a way that best serves the children in our Commonwealth. In order to do so, I move that the Virginia Council on the Interstate Compact on Educational Opportunity for Military Children, hereafter referred to as the Virginia Council, convene in closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A2 of the Code of Virginia to discuss matters that involve the disclosure of scholastic records of Virginia students and the disclosure of data collected from the identification of uniformed services-connected students, prohibited by Section 22.1-287.04. With the motion on the floor, may I have a second?
Second.
We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. And we will now enter closed session. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah.